I turned to Nawaf. Anyway, mark my words. When our company starts turning a profit, your girl will be begging you to marry. Besides, if she loved you, she wouldn't treat you like this. Love is never enough, you idiot. Anyway, how is your girl? Fine, I say, perhaps too quickly. I hesitate. I had told Nawaf about a girl after his persistent questions. You still won't tell me her name? Not even her family name? Is she still insisting on keeping everything secret? Who does she think she is, Rihanna? I told you 1,000 times. Her parents are very traditional. Right? We stick our heads up our asses and call ourselves traditional, Nawaf says. It pains me not to be able to tell him Taimur's name. I've considered feminizing it, perhaps as Tara or Tamara. But like picking at a knotted piece of string, introducing a first name would inevitably lead to questions about a last name. Then comes the name of a father and the village they are from. People pick and pick with their questions. Eventually the entire thing unravels. Taimur's name is embargoed under a cloak of aib. The closest word for aib in English is perhaps shame. But aib is so much more than that. The implication of aib is kalam al-nas, what will people say? And so the word carries an element of conscientiousness, a politeness brought about by a perceived sense of communal obligation. Aib is an old cloak that Teta draped across my shoulders many years ago. After Baba's death, she wove an intricate web for the two of us. In public, we were stoic, navigating social obligations like pros. When it was just the two of us, unspoken words rotted in our mouths. Teta hid her grief behind a pinched nose, a tight smile, and her ever-growing list of aibs. It's aib not to go visit the neighbors during Eid. It's aib to miss a wedding, even if you hate every minute of it. It's aib to pick your nose in public. Accepting a second helping of food on the first offer? Aib, shoo, I don't feed you enough? It's aib to ask a woman how old she is, or to ask someone what religion they are. It's aib for a young boy to play with Barbie dolls. And I've come to realize that if worn correctly, the cloak of aib is large and malleable enough to allow you to conceal many secrets and to repel intrusive questions. For example, it's aib to ask me my girlfriend's name if I don't offer it to you first. I suppose because of the secrecy, Taimur's name holds an unexplainable power over me. It's a name weighed down by secrets and implications, transformed into something much larger than its 7 letters. I look forward to listening to people say the name with their unique inflections and tones. I analyze it, I spell it out. Sometimes I even whisper his name out loud when I can be certain nobody can hear. This satisfies me for some time, but it's never enough. No, I need others to say his name. It makes the name real. It makes us real. What's wrong with you today, Nawaf asks. You're inside your head. I can see the sadness in your eyes. What can I tell him? That there's a reason I always keep my phone beside me, never face up on a table? That everything he saw of me before today has been a performance? From the Zedima jokes I tell, to my throaty laugh and the concerted effort to deepen my voice? That there's no girl and there never was any girl? When I had Taimur by my side, it was okay to hide behind all that, because at least I was hiding something. But am I even hiding anything anymore? We all tell lies to protect our solitude. We deny the truth and present a false image of ourselves to blend into society. It's the same everywhere, but here the stakes are much higher. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Saleem. So, the aib that you presented in this small segment touches on so many parts of our lives. So it's not only aib, at love, or aib at a workplace, or aib intellectually or politically. It seems so cross-cutting and affecting every single aspect of our lives. So how do you see that? How do you see the role that aib plays in your writing?
Well, this was the first real writing that I did where I felt myself coming face to face with this idea of aib and what was shameful and not shameful to put on the page. And at one point I realized that what I was writing, especially with the first draft, I was writing and it was very much like therapy. It was very much just putting stuff on the page and not thinking that anyone was going to read it. And then when I started to feel some shame about some of the things that I was writing about, I realized actually this is important. It's important because the book is all about, or a big part of the book is about shame, and so I think you have to you have to go through the process yourself as a writer. You have to confront what is shameful for you. And so I found myself doing that over and over again with different parts of the story. And I think it's the parts that I was the most ashamed about writing that I think resonates the most with people from what I've heard. And I think since writing this as well, I found that like when I've written stuff that I felt scared about or felt very vulnerable, that what I was writing made me feel very vulnerable, that's the part that resonates with people. But shame anyway played a big part in my upbringing, and I think a lot of people here can feel that as well. This idea that you need to act in a certain way, you need to perform in a certain way, and because it's so much about what your class is, what your background is, it has an effect on your family. So these are things I wanted to point out in a way.
But how much of Aib, I mean, I think the tricky part about Aib is also the fact that you come into it as a concept so early, as you're starting to get to know yourself, as you're starting to define what you want, who you are. So you have to deal with Aib probably way too early, you know, when you still don't even know if part of you really sees that as Aib or not. What do you actually really want to do? So it's like a superimposed concept, and kind of it's like a big thing, you know, sitting on your chest, and you're trying to define who you want, who you are, what you really want against this. And it gets in the way, I guess, of finding out what you really want to do. For me, in the writing that I do, Aib is mostly in how I feel people will see, for example, when it comes to love, it's a big taboo in female writing, like how far do you go describing, whether it's in even all kinds of intimacy, not only physical. And I felt that reading did you go through a part where you were like, okay, that's it, this is the kind of intimacy, I'll stop sharing this kind of intimacy here, whether it's emotional intimacy or physical intimacy. Did you go through that?
Yeah, I did, definitely. There's one scene early on in the book where Rasa, the main character, has an incident in a taxi with a taxi driver, where basically he has oral sex with a taxi driver. And I remember writing the first and second draft. I wrote it, and then I ended the scene before anything happened. So it was left unsaid what exactly happened afterwards. It was implied that you know, something sexual happened, but and then I sent it to some people for feedback, and a couple of people replied saying, why, you know, it really felt like you were holding back. Because they said, why didn't you go all the way in the scene? And I started giving all of these reasons about, you know, how writing is sometimes, what's left unsaid is actually better than what's left said. And then I realized that actually a big part of it was that I was ashamed to write the full scene, to actually go there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it was a big light bulb in my head when I started getting that feedback of people saying, actually no, go there, you know, just see where you go. And that stuck with me because I took that advice and sort of applied it to the entire book. You know, when I would feel a bit of hesitation about going somewhere with the story, I would just say, all right, just go there and then see what happens. So it is constantly pushing yourself. I don't know if you feel the same with your writing as well.
Absolutely. I'm always thinking about the limits, and as you said like 2 minutes ago, when you start questioning yourself a lot, that's probably when you should keep going, no matter what kind of feedback you get. So I'm happy, and I think a lot of people who read the book will be happy that you went on. The question of Aib and the passage you read touches on the concept of performance. There's this really great quote by Oscar Wilde where he says something like, take off your mask to show me your mask. So it's this perpetual process of wearing masks, and kind of it questions the possibility that there's something actually under it. And that, for me, ties in really nicely with the idea of Aib and with the trajectory of a lot of the characters in this book. Are they performing? Are they really themselves? You follow them through this path. How do you see this kind of performativity of identity? Is it inevitable? Is it necessary? Is it the only way we can deal with the world?
It's funny on the question of performance, because when I was in Berlin, someone told me before my talk, and then during the talk he asked a question about how we saw so much of Judith Butler's performance theory, genderist performance in my book, and I told him actually I haven't read Judith Butler. And I mean, the stuff that I was getting from the stuff that I was writing was stuff that I was observing, of just being really bored to death at all of these weddings every summer, and just looking around and seeing, oh my God, everyone is performing at this wedding. Every single person is performing a certain role. And so the performance comes from observing. I remember being in Yemen once, and because I'm an aid worker, so I traveled to Yemen a lot, and I had a meeting with this guy who was like, his identity was very much from the Muslim Brotherhood of Yemen. It was so much a part of his identity, and then halfway through our meeting, he stopped the meeting and said, I need to pray. And then he started praying, and I was just looking at him, and I was thinking, so much of that prayer, of even just stopping the meeting to go and pray right in front of me, felt like a performance. And I just started thinking about this idea of performance in general and how we perform. And of course, with Rasa, the main character, a lot of the struggle is around his performance with ideals of masculinity and straightness and all of this stuff as well. And I mean, yeah, so it's not really theories, it's more just observation.
In May, I was in Palestine as part of the Palestine Festival of Literature. One of the people in the delegation was Layla Lalami. She's a National Book Award winner. And we were in Hebron standing, and a Palestinian boy was pretending to shoot an Israeli officer with an umbrella. So she turned around to look at me and she said, if I write that, that would be a cliche. And it's, you know, they will tell me this is a cliche, it's happening right in front of me. They will tell me this is a performance, you know? So I think this is a little bit something as well that resonates with what you're talking about, with that man getting up to pray in the middle of the discussion. And we have to accept that. I mean, that's why personally I'm a fan of pared down writing, just because I think I prefer, you know, showing and not telling, and you know, less hyperbole and all of these kind of things, just because the situations themselves illustrate themselves, perform themselves. You touched on being an aid worker, and actually that's how I know also Saleem, another layer of how I know Saleem. Saleem used to work with Doctors Without Borders. He also worked with Safer World. And he's the one who got me into Doctors Without Borders. I've been with them for 8 years now, so thanks to them. They haven't fired me yet. So, I mean, both of us have been to different places. We've been to Yemen, I've been to Afghanistan and Pakistan with MSF. And the role of how that, the effect of that on our writing, on my writing, on your writing, is something I think that could be worth thinking about a little bit. So, I mean, how do you see the role of the writer in today's world, in touching upon the role of the activist?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, I can talk a bit about how I entered into writing Guapa in the sort of environment that I was in. So I was doing work with an NGO that was working on the political and transition processes after the Arab Revolution. So I was working a lot on Yemen and Egypt and Libya. And at the same time I was writing the book, so I would wake up every morning at 6 a.m. and write the book and then go into work. So whether I was in Yemen or Libya or wherever, I had the same routine. And so much of what's in the book was taken from snippets of conversations with different activists. I was with actually a Yemeni friend of mine who's in the audience somewhere, but I can't see him. And I told him that actually there's a line in the book that he told me at a Qachu in Yemen. And I remember writing it down. This was like 3 years ago, and it ended up in the final draft of the book. And so I think I mean, I was very inspired by the revolutions, but I was also, you know, questioning a lot of things. I was questioning my own role in it. Where do I fit in? And so a lot of the stuff that I put on the page was the questions that I was asking myself as the revolutions went from something that was very exciting, where everything was possible, to something where, you know, the idea of truth no longer existed. And so maybe in a way fiction was my way of getting at a different kind of truth that I felt that non-fiction was not going to reach. But I mean, I think you deal very immediately with politics and in your poems as well, with your experiences. I mean, your poems are about Palestine, about the politics around Palestine, but very much also around refugees, around hospitals, and you work with Doctors Without Borders, so I guess that's, you know, it works that way. And maybe you can read.
I got my book, which doesn't have that poem, so I'm going to read it from my phone. It's not because I don't have a book. Okay. So, I mean, a lot of my poetry is published online because I'm very impatient. And when I feel something strongly about something, I just want to say it out there. I want people who go to websites like Electronic Intifada or Madam Masr or Warscapes to look at those websites to find another way of finding out what's going on in the world. So I wrote this poem called No Search, No Rescue, and it's about the deaths in the Mediterranean. This poem is dedicated to the families and lovers at the bottom of the sea trying to reach Europe. How do we overcome war and poverty only to drown in your sea? Misrata, Libya. Habibi, just take the boat. In front of you, Bahr. Behind you, Harb. And the border, closed. Your sea, Mare, Bahr. Our war, our Harb. Augusta, Italy. Where is the interpreter? This is my family. Baba, Mama, baby, all washed up on the shore. This is 28 shoeless survivors and thousands of bodies. Bodies Syrian, bodies Somali, bodies Afghan, bodies Ethiopian, bodies Eritrean, bodies Palestinian. Your sea, Mare, Bahr, our war, our Harb. Alexandria, Egypt. Habibi, just take the boat. Behind you, Aleppo and Asmara, barrel bombs and Kalashnikovs. In front of you, a little bit of hope. Your sea, Mare, Bahr, our war, our Harb. Maps on our backs, long way from home. So that's the poem that
One thing that you said in one of your interviews is that, for you, writing poetry is the only or one of the only ways you have to confront the stuff that you're seeing and that you're experiencing, both in the news but also through your travels and through your work. I mean, for you, I don't know, because I struggle with this a lot about the idea of writing forms like fiction versus non-fiction versus poetry and what value fiction has, if it does have a value. I mean, Haddad Swaif, we were talking about this a few days ago. She had written something in the beginning of the Arab revolutions about how we're, in such politicized environments, there's no space for fiction. And so I'm curious as to, what role poetry serves for you and how you reconcile that with maybe what Haddad is saying.
So the Ahdaf article that Saleem is mentioning also, reminded me a lot of his book. Your book, I should be talking to you about, so your book. She talks about the role of the novelist versus the role of the citizen, and about how when there are so many real stories actually going on, is there space to imagine? Is there space to say, do you have the luxury to say, right, I'm going to the mountain, don't talk to me for 3 months, I'm going to write. When in front of you, just with a click of a computer, you can find thousands of untold stories and told stories or half-told stories that need to be unpacked. For me, and Guapa is an interesting example of that. It is in an unnamed Arab country, but it touches upon so many existing realities. So in that sense, it is historical, it is politicized, it is contextualized, it is very much present, even if, I would argue specifically because it unnames the country. And Saleem started telling me about this book back in 2013, 2012, when he was going through the process, thinking about it, really taking the time to work and to write at the same time, which I really, really admire, and the amount of discipline that went into that, I can only imagine. That's why I write poetry. I'm really undisciplined, so it's really my command. I can't. So I'm sorry to any poets in the room that would be offended by what I just said. For me, the thing again about Wapa is that had it named an Arab country, the fear would be that it would always be tested or measured or read against that. Is this Tunisia? Is this Amman, Jordan? Is this Beirut, Lebanon? And the fact that it unfetters itself from all of these different locations just gives it a lot more space, in my opinion. Do you get asked about that a lot? Like, give me the name of this country now.
Yeah, all the time. And one journalist asked me if I can give percentages of how much of it is Beirut. But that's why I decided to. I don't know. I say I decided to not name the country, and I try and justify it after I've done it. But actually, I think there was no way And even when I was asking friends for feedback, a few of them said, you know, you have to be careful with this unnamed Arab country business because of like, you know, the fears around generalization and Orientalism and this sort of thing. But I think there's one very obvious reason, which was, I mean, at the time that I was writing, if you think back to like 2013, places like Egypt and Yemen, they were so politicized. You had to stand on one side of the politics. I felt there was no space in real life for me to be able to tell the story without it being attacked for taking one politics over the other. To me, it wasn't about a specific political movement, etc. It was more about an idea, more about these feelings. And I thought, let me just free myself of real life politics and actually just explore this imaginary world and draw these parallels between, you know, Rasa's own personal struggles and the struggles of his country as a whole. Yeah.
So, Saleem, I want to ask you, I mean, we both speak Arabic, but we both write in English.
Yeah.
Why?
Why don't you answer the question?
I'm asking the questions here. Okay, so I did my this is my practiced answer. I did my master's thesis on. We're about to answer it.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you, Lewa, you're paying attention. Yeah, exactly. What's it called? So I wrote my master's thesis on female bodies, memory and desire in Samuel Beckett's late drama, a very joyful topic that did not plunge me into a depression. In that journey, you know, I found, so for Samuel Beckett, he says he taught himself French and he taught himself how to write in French because he wanted to be a foreigner in language. He said that to be a foreigner in language gives a writer a different kind of space. Okay, he wrote in both languages, but he wanted to be a foreigner. For me, writing in English, I mean, if you read my writing, you'll see that I use a lot of Arabic words, that I'm always writing in a mix of those languages. My book has a glossary that's arguably longer than my poetry, so it's to help people understand those words. For me, the mix of Arabic and English is at the cellular level. It's so mixed. It's very hard to tell them apart. But one thing for sure is that, I mean, the first time I've made a decision this year to write a piece in Arabic because also for the Pakistan Festival of Literature, somebody translated my work into Arabic, and I looked at it and I was like, I think I can do better. You know? So that's, I mean, I felt distanced from my own words. So I know that was not a good feeling, and that's why for me, it's something that I'm going to work on.
I don't know if I can throw in a Beckett quote or all of this great analysis when I'm answering this question, but I mean, the reason that I wrote in English was, growing up, I just remember being in school and the Arabic language was so rigid. And even in, I don't know, I mean, we didn't go to the same school, but maybe you have the same experience where the Arabic textbook was like filled with these, you know, really difficult poems and Quranic verses and stuff.
Arabic teachers are always...
Yeah, and I just it didn't resonate with me. The language didn't resonate with me. I didn't feel ownership over it. And for me, reading English books was always a way to escape my own issues growing up. My family traveled around a lot. My sexuality, all of this stuff that I was struggling with, it was a great escape. And so I just followed English. And so I was in Amman last week. And we had a similar event, and we did it all in Arabic. And at first I was nervous because we were talking about these very big issues around sexuality and gender, and I was thinking, oh my God, how am I going to, you know, I had to Google Translate, what is binaries in Arabic? but actually,
What is my
but actually it was amazing to use the language. I mean, it was very empowering because I felt like we were all in that space struggling to find the words, and we had a very rich discussion around different words, and it was also in many ways, and I didn't realize it until afterwards, but it felt like a very safe space. You know, I've toured the book in Europe and North America, and you often find yourself being like much like Rasa, like a translator. you know, you get asked questions and you end up in this discussion that you're not necessarily feeling very comfortable in, but you're very nervous because you feel that at any point they're going to instrumentalize your words or take it out of context. And it was very safe to speak in Arabic to an audience in this language that felt like I could say things where I didn't have to worry too much about them being taken out of context. And I do write a bit in Arabic. I remember I did write something in Arabic and then I sent it to a friend of mine. And she said, stick to English, Habibi. but this is the same person who, when I first sent her a short story I wrote 6 years ago, she said, I don't think you should be writing. So maybe I'll keep going in Arabic, you know.
Seems great.
Yeah, great. I think as a writer, you need to get used to this sort of thing, you know. That.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
feedback. Well, maybe feedback, that's constructive feedback. Maybe speaking about Arabic is a good transition into speaking about home. I mean, you already talked about the fact that Guapa, the location where that was unnamed for the reasons that you explained. How do you see as a writer your relationship to where you're from, to whatever that means to you? Obviously, for most people, it's like a bunch of things. It's not one thing or another. It's not one place or another, one language or another. For most of us in diaspora, on email, on Twitter, we're a bunch of things. So how do you see home?
I don't know if I found home yet, to be honest. And people always ask me because my background is very complicated, and I feel like I don't want to simplify it because I feel like I'm losing something if I just give them an easy answer. You know, my dad is Palestinian Lebanese, my mother is half Iraqi, half German, but then I was born in Kuwait, and then we moved to Cyprus and then Jordan, and then my parents were living in Lebanon for a while, and now they're living in Dubai. And I think, yeah, in a sense of feeling like home, I don't feel like there's a home. I feel at home when I go into my family's house, wherever in the world it is, and see the same furniture and the same interior decorating that my mother does, and then I feel like there's home, but that's a very practical, physical thing. But, I mean, I think last week in Amman felt very much like coming home in a very odd way, and I don't know if it was the language, or if it was the environment, or if it was the conversations, but it really resonated with me, that event. I don't know, I mean, I'm curious, because you write a lot about Palestine, and you read your poetry in Palestine this year, and how did that feel? Did it feel as romantic as coming home, or was it more complicated than that?
Well, I read my poetry after 8 hours of interrogation at the border, so there was nothing really romantic about it. I was just so exhausted, and I was just hoping that I would not mess up. But no, I mean, most of my poetry, so for example, 2 years ago I wrote a quartet on Gaza. The title of the first two pieces was Gaza from the Diaspora. So for me, I immediately betray my distance, and actually, although my family originally comes from Gaza, I've actually never been there. I've been to Palestine twice, but I haven't been able to go to Gaza yet. I hope so. I hope I will one day. So definitely, you know, standing there in the Ramallah court in the University of Beit Lahem, I felt a little bit like an imposter. But then when I saw the way people reacted, when I saw students, when I saw people moved, clapping in the right places, and coming back afterwards, feeling really moved, I felt like it's not up to me to decide whether to write this or not, or who I'm writing it for. It takes on a life of its own. And it's funny, I was telling Saleem yesterday that the strangest question that I got was from a person who was like a student. He said, how do you get your inspiration? And I mean, I wanted to tell him from watching the news about you guys getting bombed all the time. But his question was so honest and so removed, and it was really interesting to see that there is a role in that. For me, you know, in the diaspora, that is definitely part of our world. So, yeah. In June, following the Orlando massacre, there was a photo of you circulating online. Have people here seen the photo of Saleem? How many people? All right. So for those who haven't seen the photo of Saleem, I'll share the caption. The caption said, "My heart goes out to the victims of the homophobic attack in Orlando. So here's a photo of 3 Arab men in drag. Because fuck homophobia, and fuck Islamophobia, and fuck the hypocrites who use one to justify the other, You all have blood on your hands. And if this photo offends you, you have blood on your hands too. Tell us, Saleem, the story behind the photo.
I mean, I was very hungover when I wrote that caption. That photo was taken the night of the Orlando attacks. We were a group of us were going out in London, and it was a drag night, and a friend of mine who was in the centerpiece of that photo, was in that like really beautiful red abaya thing. Yeah, he was very insistent that we all had to dress up, and so we did. And another friend of ours was just taking photos, and we had agreed before that we weren't going to share the photos because I. And then I woke up really hungover the next day to see the news about Orlando, and then to start getting emails from reporters saying, what do you have to say about this? And I immediately was thinking, I don't have anything to say. Why should I have anything to say about this? And I even emailed one of the journalists and said, I don't have a statement. I don't have anything to say. And she called me and she said, no, but Saleem, you have to say something. Like, it's important, you have, because of the LGBT element and the Muslim element. And so I started thinking about it, and then I just decided, okay, I'm going to post this photo, and I'm going to, I was trying to write something that was very thoughtful and eloquent, and then I just realized, actually, this is what I really want to say, and then I just said it. And so that's the story behind the photo. I mean, we didn't have any idea that it was going to blow up the way that it did. But it's kind of cool. And it's cool that I don't get recognized for it. Like, people don't know that I'm actually in the photo, which is cool as well.
I think the journalist's questions to you and the kind of the insistence on you to say something and the tension you must have experienced in do I say something? What do I represent? Who do I represent? Am I representing them well enough? That opens up this topic of cliché. And the fact that, I mean, the Western gaze, if you read anything, it doesn't have to be about this. It could be about, I don't know, the war in Yemen or the war in Syria or anything. There are a lot of really excellent, actually, kind of mock Western journalist writing that tends to oversimplify whatever they're dealing with in the Middle East, whether it's war, whether it's love, whether it's sex. So, I mean, do you think about that? Do you think about what happens to your voice under that gaze, and what kind of responsibility you have, or what you can do to mitigate that a little bit?
Yeah, I think about it a lot. But when I was writing, I had to absolve myself of any responsibility to represent anyone or anything. That was the only way that I could write. Otherwise, you're just thinking about, am I saying this? What will someone say about this? What will someone say about that? So when I was writing, I had to not think about that. I became more aware of it as I went further along with the book and started redrafting and editing, and then I started looking at it through different perspectives and different eyes, including the Western gaze, and thinking. And then I became interested in how in my novel I can disrupt the Western gaze. And so I started doing that a bit, and I think, and I had there was a journalist she's an English journalist, she's a good friend of mine, but she told me that she read the book and she felt like she was being punked, which I thought was a good thing. Because that's what you want, is to disrupt. And it's not just the Western gaze I wanted to disrupt as well. I wanted to disrupt a lot of notions even within the Arab world that we have. About all of these different things, but it's very hard. I mean, it's something that I struggle with. When I made the decision to write under my real name and to have a very public profile around the book, I was very aware that issues of representation were going to be a factor. And in Amman also, we had a long discussion about where I was telling people I don't want to be seen as representing anyone or anything. And kind of getting a bit of pushback, saying, no, but you actually are, whether you like it or not, you are representing. And I still think that's my position. As a writer, I can't represent anyone or anything. I can't represent the LGBT community because I just wrote one novel. I just wrote one novel with one main gay character. I hope it's a platform for people to have discussions about things, but I can't promise that my next book is going to touch on these issues. I mean, as a writer, I don't think you can. You have to push back against these ideas of representation, while also being aware of them, that inevitably they are going to happen.
I think being aware of them is key, and I'd like to read this book that you mentioned in an article. It touches upon some of those things, so don't worry. So, queer Arabs face a dual struggle. We're battling oppressive forces within our own communities, and we're okay. Queer Arabs face a dual struggle. We're battling oppressive forces within our own communities, and we're also resisting the global narrative that tries to use our oppression for broader military or political goals. What were you thinking of when you said that?
I wrote that in an article where I was asked to talk about what it's like to be gay in the Middle East, and I spent weeks and weeks thinking about it and writing, and I just got so angry with myself and with the editors that I just decided, okay, I'm just going to really just say exactly what I think. And so that came out, and the article was about how difficult it is to talk about this, because you're stuck between all of these different things. You're stuck between, a homophobic community, and homophobia is everywhere, of course, but homophobia is also rampant in the Arab world. And you're also stuck between people who either, purposefully or not purposefully will misunderstand what you're saying or put it into their own narratives. And so you kind of end up being stuck, not feeling really understood everywhere, being seen as a traitor by everyone. And the difficulty of that, which is a very metaphorical sort of struggle and not necessarily what the editors had in mind when they commissioned me for the piece. But that, to me, at least personally, was how I was feeling. And I think as well, like, because it's so difficult to talk about the gay, the queer Arab experience, because it's so contingent on issues of class, on issues of what country you're from, whether you live in the city or you live in a more conservative area. I mean, I was in Italy 10 days ago, and there was a Lebanese guy who came up to me after the talk, and he said that he left Lebanon because it was too difficult for him here. And I told him, really? I mean, Beirut's a very open city, blah, blah. And he was like, no, I'm from Tripoli. And I said, yeah, but you can move to Beirut. And he was like, no, someone from Tripoli, I can't just move to Beirut. It's not easy for me. And I just started thinking that, actually, within Lebanon, you have all of these different experiences, and we often only hear from people in Beirut. And that goes back to the issue of representation. How can I represent all of these voices? I can't. But also, the fact that I can't represent them doesn't mean that I can't also share my experience. It just means that I'm one of many different voices. And so that's kind of the balance that I was trying to maintain. Yeah. Do you feel this as well?
I have to ask you one more thing. So yes, last week I think we were with friends who don't live here, or colleagues actually, and I keep getting asked this question, like, okay, Jehan, you lived in Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon. Where is the best place for gay people? Tell me now. As if it's like, okay, all gay people feel like it's okay in this city, and these are the list of activities that you can do. So I can only imagine, and they just asked me this question because I have gay friends, so khalas, I'm entitled, of course. I have like 5 gay friends, and I can, testify scientific politics of quantitative research. So, I can only imagine what it's like when a novel like that and a story like that is subjected to all these kinds of questions, of judgments and assumptions. And that can be a little bit of a burden, it seems.
Yeah, it can be a burden, and also you sometimes find yourself, you get caught up in a web. That's how I see it, at least. Sometimes I feel like with journalist questions, I get caught in a web, and then I feel like, how did I end up here? I remember there was one journalist who hadn't read the book, which now I've realized not to give interviews to people who haven't read the book, but she hadn't read the book, and then she started asking me very specific, through the conversation, and I guess this is the power of a journalist, this is what they're good at. She started asking me and pulling information from me about, tell me about the gay scene here, tell me about the gay scene in this country, and what's the gay scene like in Yemen? And I wasn't thinking, because I was tired, I had done many interviews, and I just started telling her, and then she started saying, can you give me the names of these coffee shops?
Yeah.
And I just realized, I had to stop and say, wait, no, this is like, I'm not, but then it's so easy, right? It's so easy when you're giving these interviews, and you're tired, and you don't know, you're just trying to find your feet, to suddenly find yourself in a space where, actually, this is a really bad space, and I need to like pull away from it, but it's this constant thing, because I also don't believe that, okay, the solution is we don't talk about these things. To me, that's not the answer. It's about finding a way to talk about them and to disrupt these narratives. And yeah, it's hit and miss.
I don't know what you think, but I think maybe it's time to open it up for some questions. Do you guys have some questions for Saleem, or thoughts, ideas, feelings?
So I actually got a book. It's NBY.
I haven't read the book.
Okay.
I'm planning to. So save me 2 copies. But I follow you online and on Facebook. And so I live in Sweden. I'm Palestinian Syrian living in Sweden here for the summer. And one of the things that I've worked on, because we all have, is refugees. And throughout the years, as an activist, as a journalist, I meet a lot of refugees who have other identities that as soon as they become a refugee, they all disappear. If it's gay, if it's as a female having your period, if you're in a situation where you're on a boat, that's suddenly you can't talk. There are so many layers of your experience that you're going through that somehow disappear. So I guess the question, if that's the question, how do you make people see that there are other layers beside the obvious?
I think there are 2 kinds of aib that we face. There is the aib in the eyes of people in the society, and actually the aib that actually we are convinced is it's aib. And then breaking that aib is more difficult than breaking the aib of the society. Because it's actually you're defining yourself. And actually as well, when you were talking about this experience with a taxi driver, there are actually different layers of aib that you were breaking in Haida. And when you were saying that you didn't want to write what did really happen, it occurred to me, and it's a question, that there is the aib first, that you're going outside your class. There is the aib that you're going outside normality, the way you were raised, of course, and on TV and everywhere. Because the aib is actually that we get convinced of is basically what we see on TVs and the normal for the society that actually is imposed on us. You don't have role models that defy them. There is the aib that comes from inside the community when it's related to slut shaming, like, oh, you bitch, or like you slept with a taxi driver and Haida. So I wanted to ask you precisely on that. As well, the concept of aib in the language, you were saying, why you wrote in English or Arabic. I think the concept of aib in Arabic for us is bigger than the concept of aib in English, because in the writing in a language is somehow you're thinking with that language, and our thoughts in English have somehow opened up big time compared to our thoughts in Arabic, and our thoughts in Arabic makes us realize that we're part of this environment, and it would make us face ourselves more as well. So I wanted to ask you also about this. Thank you.
Hi, Saleem.
Hi.
So just touching on the whole idea of Western gaze, I'm very curious. When you were dealing with the publishers and editors, who I believe were Western, did they try to impose certain projections to your plot? And how challenging was that? So yeah, I just wanted to hear a bit of that.
I know you said one more question, but my question is about that too. So I picked up your book in New York, and I was reading it as I was coming back here, and I was kind of, this, again, the Western gaze question really came up as I read the book, and you were talking about disrupting that gaze. Could you just unpack that a bit? And I have read the book, so I would like to know, is there maybe an example or how, what sort of tricks you played on that and maybe those publishers?
I'm going to give you back the mic, what else?
I know you. Well, I am. Hiba, right? Yeah. Okay. I think that's a really good question, the idea of a refugee, and once you have this refugee identity, you become a refugee. And I want you to answer that as well. But for this particular thing, one thing that came out, like some of the positive reviews, is that the book kind of goes beyond this idea of like gay Arab, beyond the cliche of it, and actually goes deep into one person and humanizes that person in a way. And I think that's what I wanted to do, but it wasn't obviously an intention. I just wanted to write the story. And I think it's really about humanizing someone and really going beyond this one layer. And just, yeah, hearing you speak made me really think that actually there should maybe be, especially for Europe, like a story like this about refugees, to really humanize and break down that identity. So it's not just about this abstract concept of refugee, but actually about the people behind that identity. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
I just want to say that I hate the word humanize. And the people who work with me know that I do. It's just because I think, so your question is interesting, and I agree with Saleem, there's a lot to be looked at in that kind of thing. If you follow mainstream media, refugees have only two layers, terrorists or heroes. So you're either hearing about the terrorists that are the reason the borders are closed, or you're hearing about the refugee Olympic swimmer who swam from where to where, or the father who carried his child. So these are really the two options you have. And I think there's so many layers. The reason I hate humanize is because it's kind of a deity role. It's like you're giving somebody something they already have. And that's why I also hate the concept of giving voice. That's why when I read some of the articles people wrote about Saleem, the ones that I was annoyed with the ones that would say he gave someone voice, because he obviously said it 1,000 times now. He's talking, it's just his voice. He didn't give the voice to anybody. So yeah, I'm just careful of those two things, but I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, no, and it makes me feel very happy when people say that they connect with the book or they connect with the main character, because when I wrote it, I was thinking no one's going to connect with this. This is totally just, an anomaly and no one's going to actually connect with it. And so to hear people connect with it kind of made me think, all of these years of feeling so lonely, actually, there are people out there who felt the same. All I had to do was write a book. On the Ayib question, with the taxi driver scene specific, I think what you're saying about the social versus the personal is very true. And I think this is maybe something that Rasa is also struggling with, because even though he realizes the hypocrisies in society and he can vocalize them, he still has his own internal Ayib monitor that's telling him how he should act and how he should behave. And the taxi driver scene, I think there's a lot of things at play there. And when I wrote that scene, a couple of people, not many, have pointed out since that actually what happened was either statutory rape or something, because he's 13 years old and he's very young and the taxi driver's older. And when I wrote that scene, it was never in my mind that actually there was a potential rape issue there. But maybe that's also part of the reason that I don't know, I think it was also just having to write about sex, having to write about gay sex very openly from the perspective of a 13-year-old was quite difficult for me. How do you capture a 13-year-old's desire? How do you even begin to give him desire when actually a 13-year-old does have these desires, and so you kind of need to confront them. So there was all of these different layers in what I was writing. And on the Arabic versus English, it's funny because I've had this conversation in Amman and also in Germany about how many of us who are bilingual in Arabic and English, we'll speak in Arabic until we start talking about sex, and then we'll switch to English. And why? What is it? Is it like a certain, does it give us a safe distance to talk about this, or is it that actually the language we haven't really, it's not the language, but the society hasn't allowed space for the language to modernize for us to speak about sex very openly. So what is it? Is it that we have these internal issues that we need this distance, or whether it's the language itself that hasn't been taken, reclaimed? Yeah, and even when we talk about the Arabic terminology for sexuality, a lot of it feels very clinical. Yeah, I don't think anyone here really thinks of their identity as mithli. It's something that we've now started to push as like a politically correct way. But is it a lived identity yet? I don't know. Maybe in 10 years it might be. Maybe it is for some people now.
If I can just add, I think one thing that should also be noted about Arabic is also the difference between the spoken Arabic and the dialects, and what we are always told is formal Arabic. So we come into Arabic with already a sense of distance, and it's interesting because now I'm coming across writing that is making me question that. I'm coming across extremely intimate writing in what I used to associate as formal Arabic, as far away from me kind of Arabic, and so I'm going through that process of questioning. But I agree with what you're saying.
On the question of publishers, it was a while ago, so I can't remember in detail, but my memory of it is that actually it was relatively smooth when it came to the story. But I had the luxury of picking a publisher, so I spoke to every editor. I really handpicked my editor. I told my agent, I want this editor, and thankfully she liked the book. So we talked about the story exactly and what direction and where I didn't want it to go and where I wanted to go. What they helped a lot was on characterization, especially with the character of the mother, who needed a lot of work, and who I really struggled to write that character. So it was very positive. They understood where I was coming from. And when it came to things like marketing, that's another story. And that was where I had some problems. I had some problems in the US with the initial cover that they chose. And it was a long fight, and a really frustrating fight, because I was telling them, I'm not going to, it's not this cover, but another cover, I'm not going to accept it. And they were coming back and telling me to you're the writer, you don't know anything about marketing. And I'm telling them there's marketing and then there's politics. And for me, I'm not okay with marketing and forgetting the politics behind it. In Italy, I had some trouble as well, because the American cover, it had a black man who was looking down. He looked very depressed, and there were white feet on his shoulders.
It's a typical Western.
Yeah, but I was trying to explain to them that the person that Rasa isn't black. I mean, but then because it's the U.S., they took it they said, oh, you need to be careful when you're talking about race here. And I said, that's completely fine, but you need to also understand where I'm coming from with the race element as well. Because if he was black, you would know that he was black. That was what was on the cover. In Italy, it was more about they were trying to frame it as being set in Egypt, because of the link between what's his name, Italian student who was killed there. Yeah, but it's a big thing in Italy, and they were always trying to connect it to the thing. But actually, when I spoke to my publishers in Italy, who are the best publishers anyone could ask for, to be honest, they were completely understood, and they said, "Oh, we're really sorry, we'll fix it, no problem," and then they fixed it. On destructing narratives, I think that, I mean, for me, there are a couple of things. There's like the character of Laura, the journalist. I thought what I really wanted to do was kind of put a mirror to some of these journalists, to actually, because they spend so much time representing the Arab world to the West, I wanted to do the opposite. I wanted to put a mirror on them, say, okay, well, here's what we think of you. And it's not a bad, I don't think she comes across badly, but I think it's about just disrupting that narrative. And it's the same thing in the US, when Rasa is in the US and some of the characters that he meets, I wanted to maybe give them an element of one-dimensionality. Not very much, but I wanted to make them a bit caricatures, because I felt like it was a bit kind of putting it the other way, to have these very human, very three-dimensional Arab characters, but then when Ross is going to the US, he's seeing things very two-dimensionally. And I kind of wanted to play with that a bit. So those are just some examples of it. Yeah.
Can I just add, also his trip to the US itself, like it a bit disrupts the narrative of what it's like to go to the US and what are the expectations of people coming from here. So, you know, in that way as well, it questions some of the reasons students go or people go. It presents a different kind of way into that.
Yeah, I mean, because there's this idea, especially there, that the US is this beacon of freedom, and that you go there and you have liberation. And so that wasn't my experience, and that's not the experience of almost everyone that I've met. And so I wanted to actually show a different thing. But actually, the reception in the U.S. has been really good, and I've been really surprised that it's been quite good. Yeah.
Is it okay if I ask two quick ones? Okay, first one is just a bit logistical about the book itself. How do you feel that writing it in first person affected how invested you were in Rasa as a character rather than Rasa as a product of your novel? Like how much more invested were you in him as a person? And back to your comment about Raja's incident with the taxi driver, do you feel like people, because of the lack of actual representation, the lack of scenes, like gay sex scenes in literature that's concerned with the Arab world, do you feel like people are quick to associate any gay sex scene with rape, even at the back of their heads? Because it's just not something that's present.
I had a question about the image of Taimur in particular. I was talking to my friend recently. He was arguing that it's very Arab-centric or perhaps Levantine-centric in the sense that the very heightened masculine in Taimur kind of runs loose in Beirut and Amman, Doha, everywhere. You know, there's so many characters like that here struggling with kind of being gay and masculine. But wouldn't you say the way queer culture is running around the world now, it can even be universalized to somewhere like the US in the sense that now it's all about like masculine for masculine, muscular for muscular, and like no facts, no fans. So would you say Taimur is purely just an Arab character, or does it have hints of perhaps maybe more of your cosmopolitan experience between London and the US, etc.?
So I have a question that's also about disrupting the gaze, but not the Western one. And so one of my favorite parts of the book was actually when Layla says Arab Americans are even worse. And I related strongly to the character because I spent a year and a half in the States after I left Syria. And technically I'm American, but I was very Syrian when I was there, and I related to that scene. But my question is, there are also layers of privilege within our society that you touched upon. As a writer, how were you able to kind of, did you have any guilt? I know as a writer I faced all my own guilt when I'm writing, like you said, not being a voice, and just kind of moving past that and being able to go public with what you write without feeling that, once again, you're kind of assuming the role of a voice or representative, not in the eyes of the West, but in the eyes of our own societies.
We'll take that.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for not asking if it's autobiographical.
I already did that in the interview. So
Oh, you did? All right. I did, when I first started writing it, I wrote it in third person, and then I realized that actually I wanted something much more immediate. And I did definitely go into Rasa as a person, not a character. Like I felt very much that I was wearing his skin, and even when I was traveling around, I was looking at the world through Rasa's eyes. And I mean, like, I was writing this, and like I was saying, I was working a full-time job. I didn't have a social life for like 2 years. I would wake up at 6 in the morning, write for a few hours, go straight to work, and then be so exhausted by the time I get back home that I would just go to bed immediately. And so these people, like Rasa and Maj and Basma and all of these people, became my friends. So I was living in that world with them, and I really became Rasa in a lot of ways. So he felt very much like...
it is autobiographical.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. On the taxi driver, I just wrote taxi driver, now I can't remember. Okay, yes. It's funny because someone in Amman also asked me, don't you think that putting that scene in gives critics, the idea that homosexuality has to do with being sexually raped as a child? If I was going to think about everything that a critic might say about every single scene, I wouldn't be able to write the book. And I think, if someone reads the book and that's what they take out of it, then that's what they take out of it.
That's not what I meant. Do you think people are more likely to associate gay sex with rape? Because gay sex is not really represented in media, especially in ethnic media.
Yeah. I mean, potentially. There are a couple of sex scenes in the book that aren't rape. And I think also the idea that it was rape is I don't know if I agree with that. I know that a couple of people think that it was rape. But I don't know. In my eyes, like Russ, it was rape because the character is 13. Yeah, he's 13 years old. But like he kind of you know, he kind of wanted it in a weird way.
But the thing about, this is where it gets interesting, because the thing about children is that what they want should not always be taken into consideration.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they're children.
Completely. Yeah.
But does the Western gaze on that? Do we want to do this? I just feel like that's a really Western. I mean, because we've been talking about the Western gaze, etc., and I feel like that's a really Western gaze because at least in the Arab world where we are right now and where the book is set, when we talk about a child being an adult, for girls, it's actually 9. For boys, it's like 14, 15. On the Western side, we're like, if they're not 18, then they don't know their own mind and you can't take that into account. So that's what I really loved about the scene, in a way. Whereas like this person actually has agency, and I'm absolutely not condoning that 13-year-old, you know, that this should be happening or whatever it is. However, just the way that you were able to write that scene where I was like, yeah, I can totally see that this person wants it. I am uncomfortable that they're 13, but I also understand the milieu in which it's set.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I really don't want to get into the thorny discussion about that because I'm not an expert at all. But I mean, I just wrote, you know, like I think that's the beauty of writing fiction is that you can just say this is what the story is, you know, and I wrote it very objectively. I didn't have a goal in mind where I wanted to say this is okay or that this is not okay. And I think the debate around it, yeah, I mean. That's great. I don't want to be part of that debate. I wrote the book, but I think, yeah. If some people want to take that, I mean, I can see how maybe it could be taken, but I don't know.
But that wasn't your intention.
No, yeah.
And I wasn't trying to give an opinion on whether I thought it was great. I was just.
Yeah, no, I know. No, it just came up a couple of times, and I didn't even when I first wrote that scene, I didn't even realize that there was a potential issue with it until my cousin said, "Why do you have like a child getting raped in the first 30 pages?" And I realized, oh wow, actually, yeah, it kind of is rape. And then I started realizing it, so I wrote it, and my mind was not thinking about those things at all.
And the thing is, as a child, Russ probably didn't think there was anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
Because.
But it goes back to what you're saying about just because he doesn't think it's wrong with it. But yeah, I mean it's yeah. On Timur, masculinity. Yeah, I think so. I think maybe. But I mean, this is what I tell a lot of people in interviews when they talk about the idea of homophobia, especially after Orlando. When they talk about the idea of homophobia being over there, it kind of makes them feel okay that they don't have homophobia. When I tell people, actually, the only time I've been attacked, I've had a homophobic attack against me was in London, and people look at me like I'm crazy. And oh my God, really? And I'm like, yeah, it's the only time that I've been called a faggot, like violently, was in London. And yeah, I mean, masculinity is definitely within, you know, issues around masculinity within the gay community is everywhere. It's not just limited to here. I was really interested in looking at it from an Arab perspective. Yeah, and so Timur for me very much represents a certain type of masculinity that I felt a lot growing up, and not just Timur, like the other characters as well. Like Hamza is another like very, you know, typical idea of, you know, this masculinity that's associated very much with like, you know, state power and brutality and this sort of stuff that I was seeing in Egypt and in Jordan, and so I wanted to write about that as well. On the Arab American, that line that you mentioned, it's funny because I feel I don't regret writing that line. But
it was my favorite line.
Yeah. But I feel like, I mean, a character, I can't remember which character said it, whether it's Layla or Rasa, but I mean, I wrote it as the character said it, and people sometimes quote it to me as if I said it. And I say, I don't know if I agree with it personally, but I think it's interesting. I think it touches a chord with Arab Americans, and Arab Americans have told me, oh yeah, that I definitely... No. They feel it. They're like, yeah. So I feel, okay, it's good. Because it is quite a sweeping generalization, which I try to avoid, but I think... in terms of assuming the voice, I think I would go back to what I was saying before, that you kind of just have to forget that you're right. Don't try as much as possible to not write for yourself.
Originally from literary criticism. So there was, at some point, of course, the lines blur and a lot of writers become critics, a lot of critics become writers, and they cross over. But, I mean, at least when I was studying literature, there was a clear distinction between those who write and those who have the distance and the view to be able, and the tools to be able to criticize that writing. So what you're presenting, the idea that the author will also have to be this autocritic, is frightening. And I don't think that could be a productive state to write. I think that should be done. So that's why literary criticism is such a rich, profession. But if the writer cannot be his own critic all the time while he's writing, that's a little bit of that. Even in terms of process, it's difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very easy for me to say it. It's actually very difficult to do it. And I mean, I'm trying to write another story now, and I'm struggling with that same thing, which I thought that I figured out in the last book. Another thing which is not as sexy is actually just reading a lot. And like learning from, see the writers that you admire, and like learning from them how they construct sentences, how they construct ideas and thoughts, and copying them and copying their style and their ideas and that sort of thing, and making them your own. I mean, don't be afraid of doing that as well, because I think ultimately what comes out will be your story.
My question is just kind of like if you're two gazes meeting each other, where you're so sick of being being forced to be the representative in the Western gaze that you shy away from it, because and how to manage that, but I get what you're saying. It's kind of like absolve.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very powerful gaze, but I think you kind of. I think as well so much of like if you see it especially in Europe and North America, so much of the Arab and Muslim identity has been constructed out of a reaction to, and I think Rasa does this as well, where he's in the US and suddenly he realizes he's Arab, and then he starts to construct this identity for himself of what it means to be Arab that is so much a reaction to how in the US Arabs are perceived. So you're kind of stuck in this weird ping pong game where you start questioning, is my own identity construction, what I'm writing, me, or is it like a reaction to all of these different forces? And it's hard. That's all I have to say about it.
There's this thing, it has nothing to do with writing, but they say, what you're saying reminds me of that. So in communities, for example, say Moroccan communities in a place like Brussels, where there are many, at some point I was reading this research that says, they will be more Moroccan, or they will display their Moroccanness much more in Brussels than they will in Morocco. So there's a little bit also of that. So like when Rasa goes to America, or when Arab students go to the US, suddenly they'll become more Arab, and if they want, whatever that means also, and if they want, and all of that. So I think there's also a little bit of that going on.
Do you have any plan on translating the book in Arabic? And can you please explain why you have named your book Guapa, the name of the book?
Is there anyone else?
Yeah, there's one more question about.
And then the covers and stuff. I think that in one place where you released the Guapa was titled a bit differently. I'm not sure where, but is there a particular reason why? I just remembered it and I thought I'd ask. And thank you for such a great novel. It's a breath of fresh air, really.
Is there any other questions? We'll take a third. Okay. But I don't know where that goes. Okay, so
is there anyone maybe in the back that you're not seeing?
Yeah.
So I actually first read your novel in Montreal, and I read it, I gave it to 3 friends, and I was like, this is what we're all waiting for, you have to read this. And they all sort of freaked out. So the part that really resonated with us was the part when Raza moves to the US, and you touched upon this a bit. And I was wondering if you'd unpack your thought process when writing this section exactly, and specifically with regards to Raza's gaze towards, let's say, white people who are living there, basically.
on the title Guapa, it's just an inside joke, really. Like, I wish I could say. Actually, my mother's friend emailed me privately, and she was like, "Does Guapa stand for gay under Arab parental authority?" And I was thinking, I wish I had thought of that. And I'm going to tell people actually, yes, that's it. No, it's just an inside joke because I mean, I grew up in Amman and I spent a lot of time in Beirut, and there are so many bars that have these Spanish names, like, you know, in Amman it's like Bonita or La Calle or Amigo, and then here there's Torino. And I just thought it would be really funny actually to just give it a Spanish name. And the initial title of the book was Last Round at Guapa. That was the original title. In the US, the marketing people said, no, they just want Guapa, just like that. And for me, I don't know where I stand necessarily on it. I mean, I don't own the book anymore. I feel like, you know, that's another thing we can talk about. But, so the original title was Last Round at Guapa. Actually, I'm just talking to my UK publishers. I was just having a conversation today with my mom about it, because they're asking me, do you want to change the title back to the original? But I don't think I will, actually. I think I'll keep it the same. But you also don't have a choice in the title of your book. That's the sad reality. You have no choice in the cover. I wrote the book myself.
Was it intentional to do Guapa and Guapo? Was that a...
No. I mean, there wasn't. And I mean, I didn't know because the original title was Last Round at Guapa, where it was much more obvious what Guapa was, or more obvious. But when it was just Guapa, I think it confuses some people, and is this like a Hispanic lesbian novel? But I mean, you know, why not? Yeah.
So much confusion.
That's your second story, right? That's your second.
I'm definitely not going there. The US scene, it's kind of funny with the US scene actually, because I wrote, that was the first thing I ever wrote, that middle section in the US. And I wrote it from the perspective of a French humanitarian aid worker who fell in love with this guy called Soufiane, and then she was rejected by him and was so angry that she kind of constructed this plan to get him deported by Homeland Security. It was a terrible story, but I ended up, when I started writing something else, I ended up stealing basically that section and writing it from Rasa's perspective. And I realized actually it was very important to the story, because you kind of need, like, I felt like I needed that balance. I needed to kind of, you know, tell the reader, because your immediate option of like, telling like, you know, a gay Arab story is, well, what happens if he goes to the US when he finds liberation? I wanted to say, actually, no, he doesn't. And when I was talking to my publishers about that section, which we worked on a lot, I remember my publisher told me, like, just go beyond the cliches of what it is to be an Arab in America. When you studied abroad, what was the one culture shock that you felt? And I told her, I just remember it being very weird that I was having takeaway with some friends, and she divided the food in the middle. And I just thought to myself, hey, to like do that, to like cut the food in the middle. And she said, okay, write that, basically. That's how you should approach this novel, that section. Like, just forget about the big theories and just talk about those tiny moments that you get. They're like being told for the millionth time, you know, oh, your life is so interesting, or your life must have been so exciting in the Middle East, or getting asked if you wear Jesus sandals, which all of these things actually happen. So that's what I wanted to really draw out, to kind of, you know, talk about these small things that you encounter as an Arab abroad. I think, did I forget any question? I think that was it.
The one about the translation.
Well, I'd love to get it translated into Arabic, but so far I haven't had any bites. I was planning to spend more time here actually talking to publishers, but I haven't had the time because, anyway, it's boring. I haven't had the time. But it's something that I want to do. I know that a lot of the time a translator will contact me and they will say, I want to translate it into this language, and I'll put them in touch with my publisher. So it is being translated into Farsi because someone contacted me saying, I want to translate it into Farsi, and I said, okay, great, here's my publisher. But I think that hasn't happened yet. I need to be more proactive with the Arabic version because I want it to be in Arabic. But at the moment, I've just been really busy to push that myself.
But do you think that there is any fear from translating it to Arabic?
I think there's hesitation. Oh, hello. I think there's hesitation by some Arab publishers about the book, definitely. But I mean, I was having a conversation with another writer here, like before the event, who was saying that he had some difficulty as well. But I don't know if I can talk about that yet because I haven't gone through that road. There was a gay, I don't like to say gay novel, but there was a novel with a gay protagonist that was just published in Egypt in Arabic called في غرفة العنكبوت, in the Spider's Room. I haven't read it yet. I have a copy though. I know it's sold in, where did I buy it? I think on Swan? No, but I'll message it. I'll message you. في غرفة العنكبوت, yeah. So I mean, there are books, you know, that are being published, but it's sensitive.
What do you think happens with the Russell when he starts speaking Arabic?
When?
What do you think is going to happen?
Oh, in this?
When he starts speaking Arabic?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm curious to see what it looks like. I mean, Russell's voice came to me very much in English when it came to me. It was very, very clear. There was no... I have written stuff before where I start writing in English and the story isn't working, and then I realize actually it should be written in Arabic, and then I start to write it in Arabic. And that's when I send it to friends and they tell me, no, I'll write it. But this one was very clear that it was in English to me. There was no hesitation.
I don't need the mic, I'm just asking you. Okay, so now if you write it
if you do translate, if it does get translated into Arabic, obviously he'll be speaking bil-Amiyya, not in Fusha. So then wouldn't it have to have a dialect? So then you'd have to say where it is situated.
That's a very good point, yeah. Yeah. Although I don't know if it would work. I feel like it would work.
But even in Amni, you think? Yeah, I think so.
When I was first reading the book, one of the first thoughts I had was that we need this kind of book in Arabic because this is such a lacking area. But then when I started reading the book and trying to kind of translate it on the spot in my head, so much of it came out really awkward because it's not the kind of... But then again, it's something about limitation of language and the limitation of society's treatment of language. Is that I personally, I doubt this is the case for everyone, but I can't think of a lot of dialogue. I can't imagine it in Arabic.
That's why it's important.
But I think, and this is where I think it's kind of interesting with the translation element, is that I don't think I mean, maybe a translator should speak on this, but I think when you're translating a book, you're not translating the book, you're actually rewriting the book. Yeah, you're interpreting it and you're rewriting it in a different way. And I've heard that my Italian translation is amazing. And people in Italy love the book, which makes me think that she did a really good job. Like, she made it so much better than actually it is in English. So I think, yeah, I think with in the hands of an Arabic translator, they would have to really take the book and do something different with it. And the stuff that kind of doesn't make sense, try and change it so that it does.
Yeah, and I think what people do a lot of...
I think what people are doing a lot with contemporary Arab literature is that they're mixing both Amni and Fusha, so that usually the prose itself is in Fusha, but then when they start speaking to each other, dialogues in Amni, and they have different words.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, hi. Regarding the translation, would it be dangerous if you translated in the colloquial, let's say, Lebanese or Jordanian? Then that actually might be a limitation because somebody in Morocco wouldn't understand. So you have to, not have to, but I think if you want to have it into a larger audience in the Middle East and North Africa, then it has to be in the classical Arabic. But then also within the classical Arabic there are layers. I mean, there are, it doesn't have to be in the المعلقات السبعة kind of, but it could be also, there are the simplified classical Arabic where it could be also light and approachable as well.
want to translate it, honey?
Yeah.
Who is this audience? I mean, because sorry, we keep talking about, like, you know, if it's translated into Arabic, which I think it should be, but then who is that audience? You know, because